The security guard didn't even flinch. He just stared ahead, earpiece in, arms crossed, like I was some door-to-door salesman trying to crash a Hollywood event. I stood there holding a gift bag. Inside was a little hand-knit blanket I stayed up 3 nights making pale green and soft as a cloud. It still smelled like the lavender soap I used to wash it. My hands were shaking so bad, I nearly dropped it. "I'm her husband," I said again, slower this time, like maybe he didn't understand me the first 3 times. The guard didn't blink. "You're not on the list." "Yeah, I get that," I said, voice cracking. "But this is my wife's baby shower. Mine. She's pregnant with my kid." He didn't move. "Sir, you'll need to leave." Behind him, through the glass doors of the venue, I could see balloons, yellow and white, and a cake shaped like a bottle. Someone walked by holding a mocktail with a rubber duck floating in it. They laughed, tossed their head back, and in that split second, I saw her. Jolene. She was sitting on a white wicker chair, belly round and glowing, surrounded by women with perfect hair and perfect teeth and those fake, exaggerated grins. She didn't look toward the entrance. She had to know I was out here. I texted. I called. I even emailed. Nothing. No reply. Not even a "sorry, babe, it's just for girls." But I was told to come. Not by her, no. By someone else. By the florist. That's how crazy this gets. 3 days ago, I got a call from a woman at a local flower shop. She said my wife had placed an order under my name. 2 dozen blush roses and a custom card, she said. Pickup set for Saturday morning, under Emery Langford. I said I didn't place that order. She said my card had already been charged. I brushed it off. I figured it was some kind of surprise for me, maybe a way Jolene was going to include me in the shower. Maybe she wanted me to show up and get all emotional in front of her friends. Maybe she wanted to make it up to me after weeks of being cold and distant. So I showed up and got treated like a stranger. Actually, no, not like a stranger. Like a threat. I stood outside the venue for 47 minutes. Watch her open presents. Pose for selfies. Laugh. Not once did she look toward the door. Not once. Eventually, I left the bag on the bench outside, tucked it under the "Welcome Baby" sign, and drove home. My phone never rang. That night, I slept in the guest room. The next morning, 6:12 a.m., someone started pounding on my door like the house was on fire. It was Jolene's mother. Her face pale. Her mascara smeared. She pushed past me without even asking. Behind her was Jolene, crying, sobbing, clutching her belly like something inside her had snapped. They were followed by a man I'd never seen in my life. He wore scrubs, a lanyard with an ID badge. His eyes locked on mine and he said, "We need your help immediately. It's about the baby, and about what you don't know." I hadn't even said a word yet, but I already knew everything was about to fall apart. And I wasn't ready. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I stood in the doorway in the same clothes I'd slept in, an old stretched-out t-shirt with a coffee stain on the collar and pajama pants with a hole in the pocket. Jolene was on the verge of collapsing. Her mother gripped her arm, so tight her knuckles were white. And that man, the one in scrubs, stepped inside like he owned the place, like I was just a tenant in someone else's life. "Sit," he said to Jolene, motioning toward our couch, like he'd been here before. That stopped me cold. I noticed the way she didn't look at me, didn't even glance in my direction. She just obeyed, head down, like a scolded child. "I'm Dr. Cates," the man said, finally turning to me. "I work in prenatal emergency care. I need you to listen carefully. I know this is sudden, but I cut him off. "No. Stop. Who are you, and why are you in my living room at 6 in the morning telling me what to do?" Jolene winced, like I'd yelled. I hadn't. My voice barely rose. But I saw it in her face, fear. Not of me, but of him. That was the second red flag. The first was being locked out of the baby shower. Dr. Cates let out a breath like he didn't want to deal with my questions. He reached into his jacket and handed me a folder. Inside were a series of documents, lab reports, ultrasound records, and a copy of something titled Parental Concern and Conflict Resolution Form. That last one had my name on it. My full name. "I didn't sign this," I muttered. "You were supposed to," he replied. But Jolene withheld it. "That's part of why we're here." The words hit like bricks to the chest. I stared at her, but she still wouldn't look at me. Her mother stood between us like a bodyguard. "What is this?" I asked. Why was I kept out of the shower? Why the hell would you file something like this behind my back? Then Jolene finally spoke, and her voice didn't sound like hers anymore. It was small, ashy, broken. Because I thought I could handle it, she whispered. I didn't want to drag you into something that might not even matter. I stepped back like she'd slapped me. Not matter? You mean our baby might not matter? No, she said, crying now. Not ours. Silence. Thick, hot silence. The kind that bends the air around you. Dr. Cates cleared his throat. Jolene was part of a confidential medical program last year. Genetic testing, fertility tracking. She was selected for experimental ovulation regulation. Speak English, I snapped. What are you saying? Jolene's mother finally said it. They implanted multiple embryos. She didn't tell you because she thought it would never. She thought only one would take. But now there are complications. I looked at Jolene again, this time searching for something real in her face. Something human. But all I saw was panic, shame, and something I couldn't quite place, guilt. I thought it was yours, she said, sobbing into her hands. I was sure it was. I didn't want to believe the timing could have been off. But the doctor confirmed the gestational age. And the blood markers. And I didn't know how to fix it. Fix what? She looked up at me then, right into my eyes. The baby isn't yours, Emery. And the man who might be the father, he was at the baby shower. The words hung in the air like poison. I stood there with my mouth open, not breathing, heart rattling in my chest like it wanted to escape. Dr. Cates added, but that's not why we're here. The baby's at risk, and Jolene needs immediate intervention. You're still her legal medical proxy. She needs your signature. I couldn't respond. I didn't even understand the question. What was I signing? Permission to save a baby that wasn't mine? A baby she made with someone else while I was knitting blankets and planning lullaby playlists? Why now? I asked. Why tell me now? Why bring this circus into my house after locking me out of a room full of women who knew? Jolene didn't answer. But her mother did. Because the father, the other man, left town last night. He wants nothing to do with it. And Jolene, she has no one else. I stared at the three of them, and finally understood. They hadn't come to apologize. They had come to use me, one last time. And I had no idea what I was going to do next. I didn't speak. I didn't sit. I didn't even blink for a while. My head was buzzing, my mouth dry. You know that moment right before you faint, where your body feels like it's underwater and your skin is made of static? That was me, standing in my own living room, while a doctor, my wife, and her mother explained how I wasn't the father of the baby I'd been talking to every night through her belly. I looked down at the file again. The charts, the forms, the blood work results, they might as well have been written in another language. But one thing was clear. I had been left out of every decision, every truth, every conversation that mattered. And now I was expected to sign a document giving consent for a medical procedure involving a child that didn't share a drop of my blood. I wanted to scream. Not at Jolene. Not even at the doctor. I wanted to scream at the version of myself who thought everything was fine. Who baked tiny blueberry muffins for Jolene's cravings at 2 a.m. Who painted the nursery walls a soft green and stenciled clouds by hand. I wanted to grab that man by the collar and shout, "Wake up. You're being played." But instead, I said nothing. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and drank it so fast I nearly choked. I needed something to do with my hands. I needed to feel like I was still in control of something, even if it was just gravity pulling water down my throat. Dr. Cates waited patiently, arms folded, like this was just another Tuesday for him. Jolene wiped her eyes and looked at me like I was the villain now, like I was the one being unreasonable for not rushing to help. And her mother just stood by the door, clutching her purse like she wanted to vanish into it. I finally spoke. Tell me everything. And I mean everything. No more sugarcoating. No more whispers. Start from the beginning. Who is he? Jolene hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She unlocked it, tapped something, and handed it to me. It was a photo. A man in a dark blue suit, holding a champagne glass, standing next to Jolene at the baby shower. He had his arm around her shoulder. Too casual. Too familiar. That's him, she said, barely audible. Gideon Wolf. The name hit me harder than I expected. I knew that name. Not personally, but locally. Gideon Wolf owned one of the largest private contracting firms in our state. He was in real estate, development, even owned shares in the hospital Jolene went to. I'd seen him on a billboard once, rebuilding the future, one property at a time. He wasn't a friend. He wasn't even a coworker. He was her sponsor. Jolene had told me a while back she'd been offered a small pregnancy grant, a scholarship for expectant mothers who needed help balancing prenatal care with professional development. I'd congratulated her, told her how proud I was. I even joked about how smart it was to get paid to be pregnant. Turns out that grant came with dinners and meetings, and eventually a private retreat up north for program members only. I remembered her coming back from that trip different, softer, quieter. She said it was just the hormones. It wasn't. He told me he was sterile, Jolene muttered. He said it couldn't happen, that he did surgery after his divorce. I didn't think it was even possible. It was just a stupid mistake. I felt something cold spread in my chest. Stupid mistake? You slept with your program sponsor, and the first time you tell me about it is in front of your OB-GYN. Dr. Cates cleared his throat like he wanted to be anywhere but here. Mr. Langford, I understand you're overwhelmed, but we need to focus. Jolene is at risk for a preterm event. We need to move quickly. I laughed. Not because it was funny. It was the kind of laugh that cracks when your brain doesn't know how else to respond. So let me get this straight. You want me to sign something to help save the baby she had with a man who just ghosted her? After she locked me out of the shower where he was the guest of honor. Jolene looked like she wanted to disappear. Her mother finally snapped, voice sharp. Don't make this harder than it already is, Emery. I turned to her, jaw clenched. You don't get to say that to me. Not when you helped lie to me. Not when you stood there smiling while I sat outside like some uninvited ex. I looked at Jolene again, and for the first time, I saw her clearly, not the version I'd built in my head, but the real person. A woman who made her choices. A woman who excluded me from every part of the journey I thought we were sharing. But here's the worst part. Even then, even in that moment, I still felt something tug at me. Some tiny, pathetic part of me that still cared. That still saw the baby as mine because I'd already loved it for 6 months. I'd already dreamed about holding it. About rocking it to sleep. About hearing it call me Dad. That's when I realized the choice wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. And I had to decide whether to walk away or to sign the paper. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. I stood there with that pin in my hand for almost 5 minutes. Maybe more. I remember the weight of it. One of those hospital pins with a logo printed on the side, nearly out of ink. I remember thinking how ridiculous it was that something so flimsy could decide something so massive. My signature meant permission. My signature meant trust. My signature meant I was stepping back into something I didn't understand, something I didn't choose. But I signed. Not because I forgave her. Not because I believed in second chances. I signed because the thought of that child being hurt, even if he wasn't mine, felt like a punch to the lungs. Because I'd already talked to him through Jolene's belly. Because I'd already imagined the way he'd wrap his tiny fingers around mine. And maybe, just maybe, because I still wasn't ready to stop pretending. They left after that. Jolene didn't say a word. She didn't touch me. Didn't thank me. Her mother walked her out like she was escorting a wounded celebrity. And Dr. Cates gave me a cold nod before following. The front door clicked shut. And just like that, I was alone again. I collapsed onto the couch, staring at nothing. There were half-eaten crackers on the coffee table from the night before. A baby onesie still in the packaging sat beside them. It said, Daddy's Little Helper. I'd bought it last week. I didn't cry. Not then. Crying would have made it real. Instead, I started cleaning. Like a lunatic. I scrubbed the kitchen counters. I rearranged the mail. I vacuumed the living room even though it didn't need it. I threw out the crackers, the empty cup, even the baby onesie, into a black trash bag like it was radioactive. Then something strange happened. At around 8:40 that night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, and on the third buzz I answered, no idea why. A man's voice came through the line, low, calm, and polished. The kind of voice you'd hear in one of those documentaries where rich people talk about philanthropy they don't really believe in. Mr. Langford? The voice said. Yes, I replied cautiously. This is Gideon Wolf. Silence. I actually thought it was a prank call. I almost laughed. But then he continued. I assume you've been informed. I sat down, phone pressed to my cheek, suddenly cold. Yeah, I've been informed. I wanted to extend my apologies, he said, in a tone that didn't sound the least bit apologetic. This was never intended to cause damage. I understand you're in a difficult position. You understand? I snapped. You show up to my wife's baby shower, get honored like a hero while I'm locked out, and now you want to play damage control over the phone? I didn't ask for any of that, he said evenly. And I certainly didn't ask to be named the father. I had precautions in place. You mean a vasectomy? He hesitated. Let's just say I trusted medical professionals who turned out to be overly optimistic. The point is, I never wanted this. Jolene misrepresented what this arrangement was supposed to be. Arrangement? I echoed. You make it sound like a business transaction. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that's exactly what it was. And just like that, everything snapped into focus. Jolene's grant. Her sudden obsession with being financially independent. The new clothes. The designer prenatal vitamins. The private maternity yoga lessons. Things we never could have afforded on my income. How much? I asked, my voice flat. What? How much did you pay her? There was a pause. Then, coolly, enough to help her start a new life. That's what she wanted. I dropped the phone. I didn't hang up. I dropped it. It clattered to the floor, and Gideon Wolf's voice kept murmuring from the speaker. I let him talk into the void while I stood up and gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, trying not to throw up. It was never about the baby. Not really. It was about freedom. She'd sold off her motherhood like a product. And me? I was just the packaging. The phone call ended without me saying another word. Later that night, I found the contract Jolene had hidden, stuffed inside an old shoebox in the guest room closet. It had Gideon Wolf's signature on it. Legal, sealed, dated. A clause stating that in the event of separation or dispute, Jolene would retain full custody and Wolf would provide financial support, but remain publicly uninvolved. It was all prearranged. And I wasn't just excluded. I was used as cover, as camouflage, as the loyal husband figure to keep her spotless until the plan was done. She never wanted a family. She wanted a transaction. And yet, part of me still felt the pull, the irrational part that whispered, but what if he still needs you? The baby. What if he doesn't know what's happening? Because that baby was innocent. And I'd loved him before he ever existed. That's the part that broke me the most. I couldn't sleep. Not even for 5 minutes. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it click with every rotation. I must have counted over 1,000 turns, just waiting for something to make sense. My body was begging to shut down, but my brain wouldn't stop rerunning every conversation, every smile Jolene had ever given me, every little detail that now felt staged. Artificial. At some point around 4 a.m., I got up. I don't even remember making the decision. My feet just moved on their own. I walked down the hallway, past the dark living room, and stopped at the nursery door. I hadn't been inside since the night before the shower, when I was still naive enough to hang up a little moon-shaped mobile and tell myself, this room is going to change our lives. The door creaked as I opened it. I half expected to see the room exactly as I left it, quiet and hopeful. It wasn't. Boxes were missing. Some of the gifts I'd bought, the special bottle set, the baby monitor, even the personalized onesies that said, Emery Jr. gone. Only a few things remained. A half-folded blanket, a baby book still in plastic, and the crib mattress leaning against the wall, untouched. The mobile I made was still hanging, but the clouds I hand-stitched had been ripped from the strings. As if someone didn't want any reminders. I stood there in the doorway, breathing hard, heart racing. And then I noticed something odd. The dresser drawer was open, and inside was a manila envelope. It wasn't there before. I swear on my life. I walked over, picked it up, and opened it. Inside were printed emails. Dozens. Between Jolene and someone named GW. The first one was dated over a year ago. The last one was from just 4 days earlier. She'd been talking to Gideon Wolf long before she ever mentioned the grant. They weren't professional. Not even close. The tone was flirtatious. Intimate. She called him Gid. He called her Lenny. And buried in the middle of the stack was one email that stopped my heart cold. You worry too much. Emery's harmless. He still thinks this baby's the best thing to ever happen to him. Let him keep thinking that. It makes the whole thing easier. Jolene, 4 months ago. I sat down on the floor, right there beside the crib parts, holding that page like it was made of fire. I didn't cry. Not this time. There was nothing left in me. I just sat there, stunned into stillness, my whole body vibrating with that quiet kind of rage that doesn't explode, it sinks. She called me harmless. She planned the lie. She used my excitement, my love, my loyalty, as a prop. And while I was building cribs and timing her contractions on an app, she was emailing Gid, planning a future I was never going to be part of. I don't know how long I stayed there. The sun was coming up when I finally stood and grabbed my keys. I needed answers, not from Jolene, not from her mother. I needed to see him, Gideon Wolf. I needed to look him in the eye and ask why a man with everything, money, power, influence, would take my life and treat it like a side project. I knew where his office was. That stupid billboard of his still stood on Maple Avenue. Wolf Capital, Building your tomorrow. I drove there in silence, parked across the street, and just watched the front entrance like some sad, trembling amateur detective. At 8:17 a.m., he pulled up. Of course he drove a black Jaguar. Of course he wore a suit that probably cost more than my car. He walked inside with 2 assistants and didn't even look around. It took every ounce of control not to march in behind him. But I waited. Waited until one of the assistants stepped outside for coffee, then slipped in behind her as she held the door. Inside was exactly what you'd expect: glass walls, fancy lighting, that cold modern vibe that says, "We're rich, and you're not." I told the receptionist I was there to drop off documents. When she turned to grab something, I walked straight past the desk and headed for the elevator. I'd seen the floor number on the envelope. Penthouse. The elevator dinged. My reflection stared back at me in the polished doors. I looked awful, unshaven, eyes red, hair a mess. I looked like a man who didn't belong in that building. A man who'd finally hit the bottom. The doors opened, and there he was, Gideon Wolfe, standing in his office, back turned, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows like he was starring in his own movie. He turned slowly when he heard the door. "Emery," he said, voice calm, like he'd been expecting me. I stepped inside and locked the door behind me. The sound of the lock clicking behind me echoed louder than it should have. Gideon didn't flinch. He didn't raise an eyebrow or shift in his polished shoes. He just looked at me the way someone might look at a glitch in their schedule, mildly annoying, but easy to ignore. I was standing in the middle of his high-rise glass kingdom like a soaked paper bag. "Emery," he said again, as if we were on first-name terms, like we were old colleagues meeting for a catch-up. "I take it you weren't satisfied with our phone call." I stepped forward without answering. The room was too clean, too symmetrical. It reeked of control, the kind of place where nothing happened by accident. Which made one thing very clear: none of this was accidental. Not the baby, not Jolene's fake grant, not the carefully timed reveal, not my slow erasure from a life I thought was mine. "You knew," I said finally, quietly. "From the beginning. You knew exactly what you were doing." Gideon didn't deny it. He moved around his desk and casually adjusted a cufflink. "You're upset. I can respect that. But you're also alive, healthy, and free to move on." I made sure of that. That last sentence made me laugh, a low, bitter sound that even surprised me. "You made sure of that? Well, thank you for the generous upgrade from husband to discarded placeholder. That must have taken real effort." He sighed and gestured toward a leather chair. "If you came here to scream, don't. You'll only embarrass yourself. And I have no desire to humiliate you further." "Further?" I repeated. "You humiliated me when you showed up to my wife's baby shower while I stood outside like an idiot. You humiliated me when she smiled for photos with you while I sat home believing I was the father. You don't think I've already been humiliated enough?" His calm finally cracked, just for a second. He tilted his head and gave me a look I'll never forget. A mix of arrogance and pity. "You weren't chosen, Emery," he said. "You were convenient. You were the quiet shadow in the background. You never asked questions. You smiled at all the right times. Jolene needed cover. You offered comfort. I needed compliance. You offered silence. We both used you. The only difference is I'm honest about it." I clenched my fists, jaw tight. I wanted to hit him. God help me, I wanted to. But instead, I looked around his office, at the photos on his wall, at the framed news articles about his success, his accolades, his empire. And one caught my eye: a photo of him standing in front of a pediatric wing at a hospital, cutting a ribbon with Jolene next to him. The caption read, "Private benefactor Gideon Wolfe funds new motherhood wing." So this was bigger than just a personal betrayal. This was his brand. "How many others?" I asked. "How many women did you offer that fake grant to?" He hesitated, just for a breath. "That was all I needed." "You turned women into contracts," I whispered. "Into quiet arrangements. You promised independence, then gave them dependence wrapped in luxury. You seduced them with choice, then chose everything for them." He waved me off. "Don't moralize. You're not here for truth. You're here because you're hurt. You want revenge? I get that. But revenge won't change biology. It won't under your name on that child's birth certificate." I froze. "What did you just say?" Gideon blinked slowly, as if realizing he'd said too much. "Nothing." No, go back," I said, stepping closer. "Birth certificate? What birth certificate?" He turned away, walking to the window. "Jolene filed it last week. You're listed as the father. I signed off on the financials. She did the rest." My knees almost gave out. I gripped the edge of the chair to stay upright. "She lied to the state?" I breathed. She forged my consent? She said you were aware, he said. Frankly, I don't care. But you should know this. The state doesn't care about DNA when the certificate is already processed. Legally, you're the father. That baby is your responsibility, not mine. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even think. I'd spent the last week spiraling over lost love, lost loyalty, and now I realized I was also being legally chained to a child who wasn't mine, who had been used as a bargaining chip between a calculating man and a desperate woman. And that's why she came to me, I said slowly, realization washing over me. Not because she needed help, not because she wanted to make things right, but because you pulled your money, and now she needs mine. He didn't answer. That was the answer. I turned to leave. You can fight it, he called out. Hire a lawyer. Burn everything down. But ask yourself, what will that child remember? A man who showed up and stayed, or a man who disappeared the second things got hard? I stopped at the door. He thought that would guilt me, that it would dig into that same bleeding softness I'd been dragging around for months. But something else was happening now. Something colder. I realized I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to punch him. I didn't need to cry in his office and beg for clarity. I just needed to walk out of that building, calmly, and plan something none of them were expecting. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was theft of my name, my future, my identity. And I was done being harmless. When I left Gideon Wolf's office, the city felt quieter than usual. The sidewalk noise faded into a dull hum. The sunlight looked wrong, the colors washed out and pale. I didn't head home. I didn't even head back to my car. I walked, aimlessly at first, then with purpose. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just reacting. I was planning, plotting. Because here's the truth, they didn't just lie to me, they wrote my name into a lie so deep, so permanent, it would follow me forever unless I ripped it out from the roots. I wasn't angry in the way people expect, screaming, wild-eyed, fist through walls. I was angry in that eerie, frozen way that makes you calculating. And the more I replayed Wolf's voice in my head, you're listed on the certificate, the state doesn't care about DNA, the more I realized what they had done wasn't just immoral. It might have been illegal. I stopped at a public library and used one of the old desktop computers. I searched state laws, paternity fraud, consent falsification, hospital processing. My fingers trembled with every click. But there it was, right in black and white. If someone knowingly forges a birth certificate by listing a non-biological father without consent, it can be prosecuted in some states. The problem is, enforcement is rare. Because the system only cares about one thing: who's willing to take responsibility for the child. But there was a loophole. If I could prove I never signed anything, and I contested paternity before the child was officially registered in all databases, I could stop it. Maybe not erase all the damage, but enough to untangle myself from this prison of polite betrayal. So I did what no one expected me to do. I got organized. That same afternoon, I visited a lawyer, not the kind that advertises on billboards, but a quiet, sharp guy named Hartley who specialized in family fraud and identity disputes. I laid out the folder, the emails, the medical forms, the voicemail I'd saved. I told him everything, and when I was done, Hartley didn't say a word for a full minute. Then he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You need to act now, today." And that's what we did. He drafted a formal challenge of paternity, filed it with the clerk's office that same day. We pulled credit card records, showing I never authorized anything related to the birth. He requested a stay on the processing of the birth certificate. And he began preparing a restraining order, not against Jolene, but against the hospital itself, to prevent them from listing me as the legal guardian until the investigation was complete. It was the first time I felt power in weeks. But things moved fast after that. Too fast. The next morning, Jolene showed up at my doorstep, eyes bloodshot, makeup smeared, voice shaking. No cameras. No mother. No lawyer. Just her. She was holding something. A stuffed animal. The duck I'd bought months ago on a random afternoon when I was still dreaming about bedtime stories and father-son fishing trips. She held it out like a peace offering. "I made a mistake," she said, voice raw. "I know I did. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But you don't have to punish the baby for what I did. I didn't take the duck. Don't pretend this is about the baby," I said. "You forged my name, Jolene. You signed legal documents pretending I was part of your plan. You used me to keep the image clean while you played surrogate to a man who wouldn't be seen in public with you. And when he backed out, then you came back to me." She shook her head, tears sliding down her face. "You don't know what it was like. You don't know how scared I was. Gideon promised me everything: security, respect, support. But when I told him I was keeping the baby, he cut me off. He didn't just stop funding, he threatened to destroy my reputation. To say I lied, that I trapped him. I didn't know what else to do. Lying to me was the solution? I thought maybe if I could just get through the birth, maybe you'd remember why we were good together. Maybe once you held the baby, you'd forget that he isn't mine? I interrupted. Pretend biology doesn't matter? Pretend trust wasn't shattered? She didn't answer. And that's when I said the thing that finally broke her. I've already filed the challenge. It's in motion. The state's reviewing everything. I hired an attorney. I'm done being your second plan. She looked like I'd slapped her. But he needs someone, she whispered. He deserves better than this. I almost felt something. Almost. But it wasn't sympathy. It was sadness, that a woman I once loved could look me in the eyes and still not understand what she destroyed. No, I said. He deserves someone who isn't a prop in someone else's performance. And maybe, if you ever really cared about him, you'll stop using people like pawns and start telling the truth, even when it costs you. She didn't argue. She just left the duck on the front porch and walked back to her car without another word. That night, Hartley called. "You want to sit down," he said. The hospital responded to our claim. And it's worse than we thought. I braced myself. The birth certificate's already been processed. But not by Jolene. What do you mean? It was someone in administration. Someone under Wolf's firm. He didn't just try to tie you to this baby legally, he paid someone to push it through quietly. This wasn't just a mistake, Emery. This was a coordinated fraud. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about my name on a paper. It was about power, control, and a man who thought he could build families the same way he built condos, with lies, money, and silence. But I wasn't going to be silent anymore. By the end of that week, my name was everywhere it didn't belong. On hospital forms I hadn't signed. On a paternity record I hadn't agreed to. In an email thread between Jolene's lawyer and the Department of Child Services, as if I had already agreed to maintain responsibility for a life I never helped create. But I wasn't powerless anymore. Hartley moved quickly. We filed a formal report with the state attorney's office, not just for falsification of documents, but for conspiracy to defraud. The evidence we had was ironclad. The emails between Jolene and Wolf, the hidden contract from the closet, Wolf's voice on a recorded call admitting the falsification, and hospital logs showing his company had accessed administrative systems without protocol. What started as a paternity issue turned into something far bigger, a quiet scandal, tied to multiple cases across the state. Turns out I wasn't the only man whose name had been borrowed, glued onto a child's future without consent. Wolf's grant program had been a cover for something grotesque, a curated selection of vulnerable women paired with private donors under the guise of empowerment, while the donors stayed publicly invisible. Jolene became a witness, eventually. She turned over everything. Her phone, her emails. She confessed to what she'd done, not to me directly, but through her attorney. She claimed fear, desperation, confusion. I believe parts of that. I think she was groomed into trusting Wolf's charm, his resources, his promises. But I also think she knew what she was doing when she locked me out of that baby shower. She made a choice, and I wasn't part of it. In the end, the court sided with me. The fraudulent birth certificate was nullified. The parental claim removed. The legal record cleared. I wasn't liable for the child. Not emotionally, not financially, not biologically. But strangely, and this might sound crazy, I still visited the hospital when the baby was born. He came early. Complications. Jolene was alone. Hartley advised against it. "You have no obligation," he said. "You're free. Don't get pulled back in." But I wasn't there for Jolene. I was there for him. He didn't ask for any of this. He didn't choose to be a symbol in someone else's scheme. He was just a small, quiet life, blinking under two bright lights. So I brought the duck. The one Jolene left on my porch. I left it at the nurse's station with a note. "This was the first gift I ever bought for you. It's not much, but it's real. Whatever happens from here, I hope you have a life filled with truth. You deserve that. More than anyone." I walked out without looking back. 6 months later, I moved out of the city. Found work in a smaller town, fixing HVACs for old buildings and schools. Simpler work. Honest work. I started hiking again. Sleeping better. Laughing more. One day, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo of the baby, smiling, wrapped in the same duck pattern blanket I once picked out. On the back, written in careful handwriting, was just one line. He sleeps better with it. Thank you. No signature, but I knew, and that was enough. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a prop, or a fool, or some tragic side character in someone else's story. I felt like a man who made it out. Not perfect, not untouched, but free and stronger than I'd ever been.